Honestly, one of the most difficult times to educate yourself on breastfeeding is when you're actually doing it. Getting ahead and preparing in pregnancy is a game changer. And this week, I am joined by Danielle Facey, better known as the Breastfeeding Mentor on social media.
Whether you've had no children yet or 8, you can't predict what your breastfeeding journey will be like with the baby that you're maybe carrying now.
In motherhood, there is so much comparison about everything, and feeding completely falls into that trap that it's important, I think, just to refocus sometimes on your journey and your unique path. Hello, I'm Pip, and welcome to the Midwife Pip podcast, the home of expert information and real chats on all things pregnancy, birth, and beyond. Honestly, one of the most difficult times to educate yourself on breastfeeding is when you're actually doing it. Getting ahead and preparing in pregnancy is a game changer. And this week, I am joined by Danielle Facey, better known as the Breastfeeding Mentor on social media. Danielle is a breastfeeding educator on a mission to help you feel supported on your breastfeeding journey and to bust the many breastfeeding myths that exist. So welcome back, Danielle, because of course you've been on the podcast before talking about the other end of the spectrum. We talked about stopping breastfeeding, whereas today we get to pick your brains about starting. So thank you for joining me.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for having me, Pip. It's a pleasure to be back. And yeah, like you said, I think it's a reminder that mums need support at every single stage of breastfeeding, from preparing to finishing. So yeah, very much hoping to plug that gap a little bit.
Definitely. And I think the thing with breastfeeding is we often think it's this linear journey. And my goodness, it is absolutely not, is it? It's a complete roller coaster. And I know we were talking before about the fact that, I'm on my second breastfeeding journey now with Alfie, and it is completely different to the first. He has thrown me so many curveballs. I kind of thought, I know what I'm doing. I did this for 17 months, my body's not even stopped breastfeeding that long ago. We'll all be good. And it's so different, but also just through the life cycle, essentially, of a growing child and things like weaning, teething, illness, daycare, returning to work. Like there are so many hurdles on that kind of trajectory of an infant feeding journey that you are so right. We need support throughout the whole lot. And that's what you do so beautifully.
Oh, thank you. And we really do. And yeah, like you said, when the breastfeeding mentor page and the accounts got started, because when I started to breastfeed, I felt like there really was, I was very fortunate where we lived at the time. There was a lot of in-person support. There was a breastfeeding unit a short drive from where we lived. And although there wasn't very much support in the hospital, I knew that it was accessible, once we were discharged. But that's not the case for every mum. And even though there was that support, a dedicated unit, literally minutes from the house, once we got past 6 weeks, they were a little bit like, why are you calling? What would you like? Because we don't work with mums after that long. And I was like, oh, but I'm really struggling with this and this. And they were like, have you tried, the breastfeeding helpline? And I was like, oh, thanks. That's really, really helpful. And it's, yes, I appreciate, getting breastfeeding off to the best possible start is wonderful. And the vast majority of us do need some kind of often hands-on support with that. And I think, there are even areas, in the country where that's lacking. But then beyond that as well, gosh, yeah, like you say, going back to work when your little one's sick, if you have to go on medication, oh goodness, yeah, let alone stopping. There's just, it's a whole journey. And like you say, every single one is different. And it sounds really naive, I think, of me to think that when I was preparing to breastfeed myself, I didn't really appreciate that my son was his own person. He wasn't just a baby that would come out and do the same thing that every baby does. And they nurse in the same way. And no, actually, every single baby, every single breast, every single mother and baby dyad is completely unique. So whether you've had no children yet or 8, you can't predict what your breastfeeding journey will be like
Mm.
with the baby that you're maybe carrying now. And I think just knowing that fact and knowing that it's normal for it to be a process in
Yeah.
the early days, it's normal to have a few hiccups, to need a little bit of support is really empowering because then you don't panic and think, oh, right, I can't do this now because we've come to a bump in the road. No, actually, the vast majority of mums do experience a face plum challenge,
Yeah.
initially at least. But with support, it's typically possible to push through, even if it's, only potentially partially breastfeeding, if that's what you want to do. And I think it's important to get across that breastfeeding doesn't have to be all or nothing either. This the breast is breast message is so strong, and I really do understand why. It's such a positive, it's such a it's such a movement, really. But at the same time, if for whatever reason, because you have insufficient glandular tissue, or you've had breast surgery, or I don't know, for myriad reasons, you simply are not able to provide your baby with all of the milk that they need exclusively, it's okay to do a bit of both. Every single drop of breast milk literally contains millions of white blood cells to boost your little one's immunity. So, for as long as breastfeeding is important to you and it matters to you and it's what you want to do, I really think that you should be supported to do that in any capacity, whatever that looks like for your unique family, your unique breasts, and your unique circumstances.
Definitely, that's such a beautiful message to get across. And, I
Mm.
totally agree. Of course, it's really important that we educate on the, multifaceted, incredible benefits of breastfeeding for mums and babies and health outcomes and all of that. I don't think there's anyone listening that doesn't know that breastfeeding is good for them and their baby. Like we have shouted that from the rooftops, haven't we? Like it's incredible. However, I think what we have not done is invested the same amount of, you know, money, energy, campaign efforts into actually helping people do it, which just leads to all of that guilt, doesn't it? There's a reason that the breastfeeding rates at 6 weeks are dropping through the floor compared to those initiation rates because it's the support. Like those statistics are glaringly obvious in what's missing in society, isn't it? It's not a surprise. And I think any mums that you speak to, I know things I often hear is I couldn't for XYZ reason. And I
Mm.
always kind of inside feel really cross for them because I think actually they were hurdles that were totally figure outable or things you could have worked around had you
Mm.
have had the support. And I think that's why the topic we're talking about today in terms of that pre-preparation is so important because at the time it is so much more difficult to gather that information, that knowledge, that support, that empowerment in the depths of the fourth trimester compared to if
Yes.
you had that information and you already understood your body in the way that you deserve to as a woman, really, I think.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're taking the words right out of my mouth, Pip. I couldn't agree more. Like you said, every mother deserves the opportunity to breastfeed in whatever capacity, is available to her for as long as she chooses.
Mm.
But it's almost it's very rare actually that a mum doesn't need some kind of support, some kind of intervention, however minimal that may be. And I think if we can normalize that, normalize the fact that, yeah, you're likely to need support and normalize just what the breastfeeding experience looks like generally too, that will be a game changer. Like you said, just having that little bit of information really, yeah, it can be so powerful. And having it before you're in the depths of the fourth trimester. I remember so clearly when my little boy was about, I think he was about 4 or 5 months old at the time, and he was very much a food monster. This particular day, we made it to playgroup. I was very proud, very chuffed with myself, and of course, he was attached to me the whole time. And I sat next to a lady who I'd chatted to a few other times, and she said, "Oh, I couldn't breastfeed." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm so sorry about that. It's really special to me." And she said, "Yeah, my daughter was just on me, for an hour or two at a time." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that it does happen." She was like, "No, no, no, like, 2 hours at a time." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, very much like that." And she just sort of looked at me like, "No, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, I really do know it happens. And I just thought, oh God, and she literally stood up and just moved away from me. And I was like, oh God, this is where I was like, yeah, new mom friend, but that that gap in knowledge and understanding
Mm,
in just knowing what cluster feeding was, for goodness sake. And,
yeah.
if only she'd been introduced to that term and had known that it's very, very normal and, completely developmentally appropriate nursing behavior, particularly for
Yeah.
a newborn, to be at the breast for a couple of hours at a time, sometimes. And every single baby has a slightly different way of nursing and different patterns of nursing, and particularly when they're so tiny, even if the only message that any mum listening to this gets is that, yeah, every single baby is so different and they're normal and their nursing patterns and what's normal for them, just it isn't predictable and it's so variable, even if that's the only message that a mum takes away, so that she can know if she has a baby, for instance, who only nurses once roughly every 3 hours for 40 minutes to an hour at a time, and her friend at antenatal class has a baby who nurses for 10 minutes every 20 minutes. If she just knows that's normal, it's fine, it's not necessarily a problem. Um, and that, yeah, just the variability is huge and it's fast. But if you understand how breastfeeding works, then you're just so much more empowered. And then you can identify if there are issues and so on. So, for anyone who doesn't know already, I think really helpful to know that about two really important breastfeeding hormones. So, prolactin, which is triggered to be released from your brain whenever your baby nurses. So, that means every single time your baby is at the breast, your brain is sending a message to your breast to make more milk. And just understanding that very simple message shows you, hopefully, that every time your baby's nurses, they're triggering your body to make more milk, to create more milk, to perhaps meet the demands of them having a growth spurt, or, them being in a lot of pain, or your supply, increasing your supply after a period of sickness or something like that. Knowing that the act of them being at the breast and nursing is really important for maintaining and establishing your supply in the beginning is vital. Because if you've never heard of cluster feeding, and I don't know, let's say you're at home, you've got a 4 week old and got friends or family over, and they just happen to have all exclusively formula fed, and they see that you're sitting there and your baby's been on the breast for an hour and a half, they may, say things like, gosh, do you think they're getting enough? Or,
Mm,
maybe you've not quite got enough milk. They've been on the boob for a long time. Yes, and that's normal, and it's only problematic. And, if you're in pain, if your baby isn't gaining weight at the expected rate, if they're dehydrated and you're not seeing enough wet or dirty nappies for their particular age, and if none of those things are applicable, you're comfortable, baby's comfortable, they're just on you all the time. It's not a problem. It's biologically and physiologically very normal nursing behavior. Um, and yeah, because for various reasons, so many of the previous generation didn't necessarily have any breastfeeding experience. There's lots of myths out there, but having a fundamental understanding that every time your baby nurses, your breasts are getting this message that they need to make more milk, I think is a crucial one.
mm.
And the other important hormone to know about is oxytocin. If you're pregnant, you've probably heard about that a lot. The love hormone, the cuddle hormone. It's all about bonding and closeness. And it literally helps your milk to flow. So the fact that maybe your 6 week old wants to be on you all the time, it's not a bad thing. It's not a sign that there's anything wrong. It's really good for your milk production actually, and to help getting your milk flowing, and to help you hopefully feel well and good and rested, and to
Mm.
drift back to sleep after night feeds and so on. And I think, again, for various reasons, we're a little bit obsessed with independence in this country, certainly. probably in the US as well, I would say. Um, but actually, even as an adult, I'm pretty reliant on my mom. She gets in with childcare and just general life advice. And none of us are islands, and particularly not our tiny newborns. They are very dependent, and that's not another myth, is that, breastfed babies are more needy. No, they're just, signaling to mom that maybe they need a little bit more milk, and that's okay. It's normal. It's natural. It's nothing to be worried about. And yeah, as soon as you have a toddler, just you try and stop them being independent.
Yeah, I was going to say, Finley was breastfed for a fairly decent amount of time, and now at 2.5, he is the fiercely most independent. I do it myself. No, leave me, get off, toddler ever. But I loved what you were saying there, Danielle, because I think I've shared on the podcast before that with my firstborn, I am very clear that had I have not been a midwife and had the understanding that I have on the early side of breastfeeding, day 5 is where our breastfeeding journey would have ended. And we ended up feeding for 17 months until Finley just kind of self-weaned, to be honest. But
Yeah.
that is absolutely where it would have ended because, like you were saying, my husband's mum had 3 boys and she breastfed them all. So their side of the family and my husband's understanding, because he was the eldest of 3, was very breastfeeding focused, which was great. My side of the family is very bottle feeding focused. And I remember my mum saying to me, even with me being a midwife, um, he's feeding so much. You must, like you're saying, you must not be giving him enough. This isn't normal. Do you not think he just needs a little bit, just like a little top up of some formula, and then maybe he'll sleep better. Maybe you'll get more rest. I remember that conversation. And at that point, I was like, oh, unhelpful advice in one ear out the other. But had I not had the knowledge I have, and that was my only influence, I probably would have gone, oh yeah, maybe he's starving. Maybe I'm not giving my baby enough. And those that have been following me for a while will have seen pictures of baby Finley, who was absolutely massive. Rolls within rolls within rolls. So there was absolutely no way that he was not getting enough milk because he was humongous. So that
That
was
is
very
a
reassuring
good
and
point.
as time went on. But I remember that influence. And I just think, yes, that is why it's so important we address this in pregnancy and that women actually understand their bodies. And one of the things I wanted to kind of touch on with you today, Danielle, is boobs are clearly amazing, aren't they? We thank goodness for them. But I wonder if you could explain a little bit about how they actually prepare in pregnancy for breastfeeding. Because I think often when you know that even without you noticing, your body's been making this incredible preparation, kind of just installs that bit of extra confidence in you, doesn't it, as a new breastfeeding mum?
Yeah, so anyone who's pregnant right now and listening to this or hoping to be, if you're past around the first trimester, then your boobs have already started to make colostrum, way before your baby arrives. And they're already gearing up for the moment that your baby is born. And, it really does start then. And then, the alveoli cells in your breasts are increasing and they're filling with milk. And as you progress and you go into labor, it's like a chain reaction, and your breasts are gearing up, and all of these hormonal shifts and changes are happening to let your boobs know, right, baby's here, let's get making that milk. And, I think another important aspect of kind of setting yourself up to be able to breastfeed as best you can is to understand the importance of golden hour. If you possibly can have it, just again, that just kind of flows from this natural, almost chain reaction of events from giving birth and your progesterone and estrogen levels plummeting. And then as you start to breastfeed, your prolactin and oxytocin levels surging. And all of that playing a role in getting your breast ready and to make milk and to nurse your baby. And so, yeah, if you're thinking about your birth plan at the moment and you're worried about producing enough milk because, maybe you've got friends whose boobs are leaking colostrum and they have been for months, that's not necessarily a sign that of your milk supply. It's completely irrelevant. Equally, the size of your breast is completely irrelevant. You might be an A cup with, I don't know, let's say 8 different branches of these alveoli cells. If you
Oh, I'm a
imagine,
good A cup. I'm only an A cup
yeah,
here, and we're breastfeeding.
fine. Yeah, completely irrelevant. It was definitely a concern of mine in pregnancy. I was, maybe a B on a good day, and it doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. You might be an A cup with 8 different branches of these alveoli cells where the milk is made. Or you might be a G cup with 2, and really, it's irrelevant. And your baby, when your baby is born, they learn the breast that they get. So again, every breast has a different capacity for holding milk, storing milk, will make milk at a different speed, and you and your baby have to find a rhythm that works for your both, for your baby's appetite and the rate at which your breasts produce milk, and the capacity, at which they hold milk. It's very much a dance between mother and child, and yeah, really just emphasizing how completely individual it is to each mother and baby dyad. There really isn't kind of one rule that fits all, but it is applicable that every breast makes milk in response to that prolactin being produced and being stimulated, and the oxytocin releasing the milk, and that cycle happening and continuing. So there are so many products on the market that claim to boost milk production, and potentially maybe some of them do, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence, and maybe they've worked for half the mums that you meet at a baby group, but to date there isn't any evidence that supports that. But we do know that irrespective of your breast size or shape and so on, the more you remove milk from your breast, the more milk your breast will produce. It's as simple as that. It's almost oversimplified, and I think we often overcomplicate things, but it really is as straightforward as, if you nurse more often or pump more often, your breast will make more milk. And even if you have a true low supply, your breast will make as much milk as they possibly can if you nurse or pump more frequently, and you're getting as much sleep as you possibly can. You're eating well, you're getting enough calories, you're hydrated, and you're not overly stressed. Then, your body and your breasts will make as much milk as they can, in response to the demand that your baby is placing on them. And I think, again, like you said, talking about the prevalence of formula and norms and practices with nursing, potentially every 3 or 4 hours. That was certainly the advice probably when we were babies. And so it's the advice that many grandparents will be offering now. And we know that actually, if you're breastfeeding and breastfeeding exclusively, that advice is almost how to make sure that you don't make enough milk necessarily.
Yeah.
Because, if your baby's not placing that demand on your breasts, then they can't respond. So, having a fundamental understanding of the importance of responsive feeding, knowing that irrespective of how much your breasts do or don't change in pregnancy, that they are making milk, even if it's not leaking out, or even if you struggle to hand express colostrum, if you've been thinking about that, if you've spoken about that, and given the all go to do the all clear to do that beyond 37 weeks of pregnancy, and you're struggling. I very much did. I couldn't get anything out, but then had a huge oversupply, which I couldn't have anticipated. And I think just realizing that and understanding that irrespective of what your labour looks like too, I very much had this idea that I was going to just arm my son out in, this like a room filled with scented lemongrass and lavender and so on. And in the end, it was just so very different from how I imagined. And I was in labour for 4 days, and I ended up developing sepsis, and I had an emergency section, and didn't know before I had my little boy that having the section might delay my milk coming in too, but that it would come. It was about day 5 for me, which again, if you just have no idea that that's normal and can happen, you might be thinking, well, I'm only getting a few mils of colostrum. This can't be enough for my baby.
And how often do we
Um,
hear women say, I just didn't have enough milk or my milk never
oh,
came in? And it again, it comes down to that pre-education, doesn't it? And I
mm,
and I loved what you said about the overcomplicating sometimes of
mm,
breastfeeding. And I think part of that probably comes down to, like you alluded to, that comparison element. And
yeah,
we almost assume there's going to be a problem. Whereas if we can just assume that our body and our baby will know what to do and follow their lead. I took Alfie for a tongue tie division and I said to the midwife then, will you just check my latch? Because I still don't actually think I know how to breastfeed because I've
mm,
just basically followed the boy's lead and just kind
yeah,
of gone with it. And she was like, well, that's the perfect thing to do. Oh
yes,
yeah, of course.
literally.
So without, I think sometimes we just overcomplicate it, and actually, it is something we can allow some instinct to come into. And actually, if our
Oh,
babies are going to feed constantly one day, great. The next day, they might go that magic 3, 4 hours. We're yet to
yeah.
get there, 8 weeks in, I have to say. But sometimes they might, and that's okay. We eat and drink differently every day, don't we? And they're the same, right?
Yeah, and that's okay. I think just, yeah, like you say, just normalizing that,
Mm.
knowing that, yeah, we, as much as we might like to organize our days and have a fixed routine, nature doesn't really work that way. And I think that way of being and living in and mothering intuitively for many of us is very at odds with the world around us. And it,
Yeah.
it could that's definitely been a real source of conflict for me. And as a teacher, oh gosh, I just cringe when I think about just my preconceptions. I look back at like messages that I sent in the family WhatsApp group about how I'd gotten my 4-week-old into a routine because for the past 2 days he'd woken up, done a poo, nursed for this long, and then we sang songs. And then it all went out the window, and I was like,
Where's my
oh,
routine gone?
I don't know what to do now. We're supposed to do it, like this, and it's supposed to
Yeah.
tick these boxes and fit into this time schedule. And yeah, particularly if you're nursing
It doesn't
exclusively,
work.
yeah, there is no schedule. The baby's just the schedule, and that's okay. And it's not just okay; it's optimal actually, for maintaining your milk supply. And yes, that will adapt with time, but for as long as you want to keep breastfeeding, you can figure out a way to, maybe, say you go back to work, maybe you only nurse first thing in the morning and just before bedtime, or, just knowing and yeah, knowing that your body will adapt, that your little one will adapt, that you'll find a new rhythm.
Mm.
And what nursing looks like at the beginning is, it might be very different, in a year's time if you're still going. And that's okay too. You needn't worry. And if you can tune into your instincts, then I think you're doing, yeah, a better job than I managed to do. I really struggled with that.
But
Um,
yeah, I do think that, that routine element is a massive one for parents. And again, I think often that comes down to the media and social media, and everywhere you look, there are sleep schedules, and this is what my baby's doing, and that's what my baby's doing. And it's really unhelpful. And actually, I often say to parents, there will come a time where your child usually thrives off a routine. I know once our toddler was probably, I don't know, 6, 8 months. Actually, he really thrived off having a routine. It really made an impact if his nap time was an hour late. You saw it in his behavior and his ability to, wean and things like that. And it actually becomes really debilitating. I
mm,
find the routine for Finley now a bit restrictive, if I'm honest. If he's not in the bath by 6 o'clock, then bedtime becomes like really dramatized, whereas it's super smooth if he's in the bath at 6. But that's
yeah.
really limiting because it means if we want to go out for dinner, we have to book a table at 5 and it can't be too far away. And
Yeah.
nap time, it means you either got to be in the pram or the car or at home for a nap. And that, honestly, I promise to anyone listening that is like craving a routine in the early days, there will come a point where the routine becomes a bit of a pain. So
That is
embrace
so
the fact
true.
that you can go to the pub at 9 o'clock at night with a newborn baby and nurse in the pub, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Actually, that flexibility I love. I remember going on a hiking holiday when Finley was a baby, and we were sat having a roast dinner after a long day walking, probably at about 9:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock, with a big roast dinner, like just sat there by an open fire. And it was amazing. And I remember thinking when we planned a second, we'll never be able to do that because we're still going to have a toddler that needs a routine. So actually embracing that complete, some would say chaos, but I feel like my life's chaos anyway. So it's probably why I'm comfortable with it. But embracing that complete flexibility that if you want to meet a friend for a coffee at whatever time of day, you can, as long as you've got your boobs with you, you're good to
Yeah,
go.
it really is okay. And yeah, nursing in public is another one which I think many mums feel anxiety around in the early days. I definitely did. But just, knowing little tricks, like even if your baby doesn't accept a kind of traditional cover over their head, if you have, I don't, like just a scarf that you can drape across your chest, no
Yeah.
one needs to see anything. Or if you wear a top underneath another top, so it's called the one up, one down method, and you wear a vest top underneath, say, a jumper, and then you just lower the vest top, get your boob out, lift up the jumper. No one can see anything.
No.
It doesn't have to be this whole performance, and you don't have to be getting your whole boob out if you don't want to. But similarly, if you are comfortable and that's what works for you, that's fine too. Breastfeeding is protected by law in the UK across, all 50 US states, I think Australia as well.
Mm.
In many European countries, it's not necessarily protected by law, but it's just normal. So it
Yeah.
doesn't need law.
We've all
And
seen boobs before. That's what I always think. We've all seen boobs, and mine really are no different to anyone else's.
exactly, everyone wants to see boobs until there's a baby attached to them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's also
it's
that.
so true, isn't it? It's so true. It's so funny that dynamic. I feel like I was really discreet with Finley and I always made sure I had like nursing clothes on, special, you can get beautiful clothing now, can't you? In the kind of nursing accessibility. I had all of that. And with Alfie, I think I just get my boob out, to be honest. He also is, and we were saying about them being so different. Finley would have probably breastfed with anything over his head. He was completely unbothered as long as he was on the boob. Whereas for Alfie, the boob has to be completely clear. Even if my bra is like slightly covering or like getting close to his eye, he gets really fussy. So it is just easier to get my whole boob out for him. And it's again, it comes back to that thing of everyone's journey is different. And in motherhood, there is so much comparison about everything. And feeding completely falls into that trap that it's important, I think, just to refocus sometimes on your journey and your unique path.
Absolutely. I think just a very quick tip on that note is I found journaling very helpful, often very publicly via the page, but
Yeah.
just for kind of, just because I think, we live in such a noisy world, just to kind of dig deep and tune into what it is that you want, tune into your own body. If you're getting advice left, right, and center, not necessarily from experts, but just, all and sundry when you
Everybody.
have babies,
Yeah.
quite frankly. Stranger walking
Absolutely
past on the
everybody.
street, have this shout unsolicited advice at you. Journaling I found very helpful, just kind of tracking your thoughts, even if it's, just a minute in the morning, to help you just kind of recenter and tune into your own voice amidst the noise. That can be really helpful and just kind of help you find your rhythm, whatever that is for you and your family, because it's just such a huge transition. And yeah, again, coming back to this message of breast is best being everywhere. Yes, we hear it all the time, but actually, in reality, the support then once your babies are born isn't necessarily, doesn't necessarily exist,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, so yeah, particularly if you have unsupportive friends, family members, sometimes even a partner who's unsupportive, I think education is so incredibly empowering. And for you to know that actually, no, it's completely natural and normal for instance, day two syndrome. It's often known as day two syndrome. It's actually day five for us, but whenever you're typically when your milk comes in, very normal for your baby to literally be up all night nursing, on and off the whole night. I still have the notes on my phone. It was between 10 p.m. and about 5:30. And I was convinced, as a new mom who really just didn't understand much about breastfeeding, that something was wrong, and I sent my poor fiance out to various pharmacies buying dummies and gripe water and all sorts of stuff that we didn't need at all. And if I just, if I just read that, oh right, this is normal and it's just, my baby letting me know that he's growing and my milk's come in and he's really hungry and thirsty and it's helping to establish my supply, then I might have relaxed a little bit and
Yeah, just had a
I
cup of tea and a
am
pack
half
of
the less
biscuits and gone
stressed.
with it, right? Like
Exactly, yeah.
lean
Pile
into
up
it.
the snacks, get yourself a water bottle, and just go with it because it won't be forever. I know that it feels certainly felt like it that
Yeah.
particular night at the time, but it really won't be. And yeah, as it's such a cliche. Every single person says it, every parent says it, but time really does fly, and before you know it, it's easier to keep breastfeeding than to stop. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think having the knowledge and the confidence to just find whatever your rhythm is as a family is, yeah, I think I would wish that for anyone who's listening. Mm.
And I love your tip on journaling. One of the things that I do is I always think if I'm struggling with something, what would I do if nobody else ever knew? What decision would I then make if no one ever knew what decision I was making? Because I think that again just brings you back to your core values and what's important to you amongst that noisy space, doesn't it? That kind of exists. And yeah, it's we're in a really difficult societal time with feeding. And I think I find my heart really breaks for those mums that stop breastfeeding at around that 6 week mark, especially when we know it's out of lack of support. And that's because you've essentially done the hardest bit.
Yeah.
Once you are, set up, it really does become the easiest way of feeding in terms of practicality, finances, and then you reap all those benefits. To start with, can be really hard, not for everybody, but for lots of people, it can be really, really hard. And often we just tiptoeing on that edge before it's about to get easier when we stop. And I just think
Yeah.
that feels so, so, so unfair for women that
Mhm.
stop at that stage.
It really is. And I think the statistics are that it's about, well, the most recent ones that we have are it's about 80% of mums stop breastfeeding before they really wanted to, which I just think is absolutely heartbreaking. Um, it meant so much to me, and I didn't realize how much it would mean to me
Mm.
until for I was born. And then even, I don't know, I just turned into this like tiger mama bear, who was like, I'm going to keep going for as long as I want, and I won't have anyone tell me what I'm going to do. This is my mother, this is my child, and
Yeah.
fiercely protective of it. And it's just, yeah, it's so deeply sad when so many moms just don't have the option, when just a little bit of information and support would make, the world of difference.
Mm.
Understanding how breastfeeding works, knowing common challenges, busting myths, and yeah, being able to recognize when actually, no, I do need help here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I can't just push through. I think there's definitely a misconception that if you just, you just keep going, if you're just determined enough, it'll work. But actually, just because, breastfeeding's natural, it's not necessarily always instinctive. And with issues like oral ties or, inverted nipples for anyone who's had breast surgery, all of these things, yes, they might make breastfeeding really challenging in the early days. But again, your baby will learn the breaths that they get.
Yeah.
You just might need a little bit of extra support. So if you know that in advance, you can plan for it, maybe budget for a local IBCLC, someone you can meet while you're still pregnant, perhaps, so that, when it comes to the time when you're sitting on the sofa with your boobs out, it's a bit more comfortable. Then that'd be
Yeah.
wonderful, and just to
It's a great
prepare for
baby shower gift as well, isn't it? You don't need a
oh my
thousand baby grows. You really don't. Or a baby
God.
hats and mittens. You really don't need them. Whereas actually something practical like that is a game
Yeah.
changer.
Indeed. Yeah. So, yeah, to anyone listening, if breastfeeding is important to you, invest in it now. Just Google a local lactation consultant. Just so you may not ever need them, that's fine. Just have their number, maybe know how much they charge. Um, Tell your partner as well, if you have one, or your birthing partner or your support network, that if I'm struggling, and I'm sleep deprived and I can't really think straight, this is the person who can help me with breastfeeding. Please remember that,
Yeah.
because you might not necessarily. And I get lots of queries all the time online. And while I can always offer, information and education on breastfeeding, if sometimes you really do just need a little bit of hands-on support, a bit
Yeah.
of an adjustment, a squish of the boob, and that's it. So I would always recommend hands-on support from, could be a peer supporter. Maybe there's a breastfeeding peer support group near you,
Yeah.
or a breastfeeding counsellor. Kind of the gold standard is an IBCLC, an international board certified lactation consultant, because they've had over 1,000 hours of, they have a medical background, and then over 1,000 hours of literally hands-on support for
Yeah.
breastfeeding moms. So please, if you're struggling at any point, don't just think, oh, I just can't do it. If you want to carry on and it's important to you, just ask for some help. And it's certainly easier said than done. But it's so worthwhile. I can't tell you, how much our journey means to me even now, just how precious
Mm.
those memories are. And, whether you have one child or seven, every journey is so different and so precious. And it's finite, whether it's 6 weeks or 16 months, 6 years maybe.
Mm.
It's so precious because it doesn't last forever. They all grow up at some point. But hopefully, again, with a bit of information and education, it can be on your terms rather than left to chance.
Mm. And I think obviously I work with lots of pregnant mums, Danielle, and I think if you're a pregnant mum listening to this and think, I want to breastfeed if I can, because that's something I always hear. If I can, I really want to breastfeed, then I just
Oh,
want you to know that you absolutely can. There is no
yeah,
way that you can't breastfeed. And so Danielle's advice in terms of find that person now, even
yeah.
if you're listening at 8 weeks pregnant, just find that person now that's going to support you, because you can. The limiting thing is going to be support and understanding,
Oh,
not perceived low milk supply or all these other factors that often we hear. They're really not the reason. The reason is the support and education. So the
mm,
kind of real thing, if you're listening as a pregnant listener, you can breastfeed. You really can. You just need to
mm.
know what you need to know. And often we don't know what we don't know until we find out. So
Oh,
getting that support in early is going to change the game for you.
absolutely.
Now, Danielle, everyone that comes on the podcast, I always ask for 3 top tips. And you've already given us loads, but if you could share your kind of 3 top tips, perhaps to someone who is listening and wanting to breastfeed when their baby arrives.
Yeah. So first and foremost, information and education.
Mhm.
Just again, like you said, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And, irrespective of what your breasts are like now, whether you have flat nipples, whether you've had breast surgery, you have insufficient glandular tissue, the likelihood is the vast majority of moms really can exclusively breastfeed. Equally, the vast majority of moms will need support at some point. Just knowing that, first and foremost, is essential. But any information that you can garner around starting breastfeeding, what to expect in terms of breastfeeding behavior, to empower yourself, is just going to be so worthwhile. Because just kind of going into it blindly, it's what I did, and it was without, again, just access to support. I just wouldn't have been able to breastfeed, and I know that not everyone has the access that I was fortunate to have. But if I'd had the information, I would have known, right, when this happens, I need to get help. If I'm experiencing pain, I need to get help, and so on. Which brings me on to my next tip. If you experience pain at all, particularly in the early days, get help. Don't expect that it's just going to magically resolve itself. Occasionally it might, and your baby might just figure out, you and your baby will just figure out a deeper latch. But it could be a sign that your little one has oral ties, that, it could be positioning issues, and that you could do with just, again, a little bit of hands on support that you would never have stumbled across yourself. So, if you're in pain at all, get help as soon as you possibly can, because a lactation professional will be able to help you, and it could just be that tiny little bit of intervention that makes the difference between you being able to breastfeed, potentially for years, and not being able to breastfeed at all. And then having that really sad regret that I know so many moms have. My mum, she's 60. How old is my mum? 60, nearly 63. She's 63 now, she's nearly 64. And even, now deeply regrets the fact that she was told that she couldn't breastfeed twins. She didn't even try and wasn't supported at all, even though she wanted to, was just said, oh gosh, you can't breastfeed, you're going to be having twins, and she was just like, oh, okay. And that's a regret for her even now, which is so sad. So yeah, education, getting help, and I think the third tip would be finding community. So finding whether that's in person or online, just because, yeah, there's so much competition, sadly, in motherhood, and there's so much differing advice. There are so many comparisons. If you're all in the same boat and you find a community of moms who are breastfeeding in person at a breastfeeding group, then just so much is normalized, and you can talk about the challenges and the struggles without fear of judgment, without excluding that lady who you really liked but who just doesn't want to hear about the hard time you're having with breastfeeding because she desperately wanted to and couldn't. So yeah, community is a game changer. We were never meant to do anything in isolation, least of all motherhood, and nursing. And we can just learn so much from each other. You don't need to be lactation trained to be able to offer someone moral support and to share stories and to find common ground. So yeah, educate yourself, get help if you're worried, if you're concerned at any stage, but always if you're experiencing pain, and find community, whether that's in person or online, because it's a game changer knowing that you're not alone. Because yeah, as difficult as it is to experience any challenges as a new mom, when you realize that you're not the first to experience it, and that actually there's a whole community of moms who've had exactly the same issues as me, and these are their tips. It's just so helpful. Takes the weight off. I think it can release guilt as well, and hopefully just help you enjoy breastfeeding a little bit more.
100%. I often say when women support women, amazing things happen, and that completely correlates to breastfeeding. Danielle, thank you so much for your time and reassuring words and expertise. We're really grateful to have you back on the podcast talking about this other end of the breastfeeding journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Pip. And I wanted to offer a special deal for your listeners. So anyone who listens, I have a new guide. It's called Preparing to Breastfeed, and you can use the code Midwife Pip to get 50% off. So very big juicy discount. It's a 95-page guide full of everything I've spoken about, plus a lot more. It busts myths and just helps. It will give you a sound understanding, you and your partner, and anyone who's going to be in your support network, how breastfeeding works, what's normal, and when to get help. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, that's super, super kind, Danielle. Thank you so much. And for anyone who wants to take Danielle up on that very kind offer, head to the episode description where you can be linked through to her details to get your hands on that. Thank you so much. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.